But yeah, I mean, I did Jericho, and it was a fucking nightmare, I tell you.
Right.
The only reason I did it is because it's got like really good world building. It's got a really cool level design, and the aesthetics are great, and the story's not bad. But the fucking game,
Right. Yeah.
oh my god, it is. By the way, ladies and gents, if this goes up in the podcast, by the way, and you do happen to be curious about Clive Barker's forays into video games, play Undying.
Okay, there you
Play
go.
Undying. It's flawed, but it's good. It's good
Right.
fun. It's got a good story. It's got the worst voice acting in the world.
That's a bold claim, man.
It really does.
I mean, I played the Command and Conquer games. I
oh.
know bad voice acting.
Yeah. I'd argue this is worse.
Okay. Well,
Although,
okay,
you know, Clive Barker is actually in it as one of the characters, and he's quite good.
Oh, fab.
Very recognisable with his raspy, not quite Anglo-American.
Right.
Very
yes, his accent's
recognisable.
very strange these days, isn't it?
Oh,
Yeah.
it's so weird. He talks kind of like that. He's not quite British. He's not quite LA. It's all at the back of the throat there. It's really strange. Really weird. I like it. I kind of like it. I think it suits him. I think it suits his ethos.
Absolutely, yeah.
It really does.
Yeah.
Although I did see some of the footage of him appearing at a recent convention, and man, does the guy look ill.
Yeah,
Oh.
yeah, and from everything I understand, he's better than he's been in years. So
Yeah,
goodness knows what he's
so
been looking like.
Goodness knows. I mean, I know from the accounts that have been given, he was so ill, it's unbelievable. He should not have survived. You know,
No, that's right. Yeah,
the condition
Yeah.
that he had, most people don't.
That's right.
So, you know, and it's so weird because throughout those years, like 2016, which claimed David Bowie and George Michael and Alan Rickman and a million others, I was
sanity as a species,
and
probably.
our collective sanity. Yes, that was one of the turning points. I was waiting every day. I expected to wake up and find it, and he didn't.
No, he hung on, didn't he?
He hung on, yeah, he really did. He really, really did. I mean, my dreams of meeting the man one day are still kind of
There
there. They're
No, absolutely.
still
Look,
there.
he's doing conventions again, so who knows, right?
Yeah, who knows?
it's,
I'd
you
love
know.
to. I'd love to.
Yeah,
I missed
yeah.
him one summer. I missed
Really?
him one summer. I didn't realise he was coming to. It was a while back. It was way before he had his illness, but I didn't realise he was coming to one of the London horror cons. And I was told after the fact, you know, and it was like,
Oh, so frustrating.
fuck. Because he doesn't do much in the UK anymore. He really doesn't. I mean, I don't think he can.
No,
I think he can't travel at the moment, not massive distances. And the likelihood of him doing anything again in the UK is it's unlikely, I think.
Yeah, it's pretty low, isn't it?
So that may require a holiday. A holiday specifically to meet Clive Barker. I mean, if I
There you
take
go, pilgrimage.
if I take my current boyfriend with me, I'm going to have to explain that.
Well, you know what you really wanted to do is signing in New Orleans so you can take in Billy at the same time, right?
Oh, Jesus, yeah, that'd be awesome. That'd be awesome. I think I've got way more chance of meeting Billy because I've actually spoken to Billy a couple of times, you know,
Right.
about various things. But Clive, I imagine, is a little bit more unreachable.
Yeah, I mean, you'd think. I mean, I guess it's kind of there's levels of fame, aren't there?
Yes.
You know, Barker's kind of in that kind of upper echelon. Where I imagine.
Well, people know him, don't they?
Right, and I think you get to that level. It's like you could be infinitely giving of yourself, and you'll still never satisfy more than a very small percentage
Yeah.
of the people that want to meet you. So you have to start being quite ruthless, I think,
I
about
suppose you do. I suppose
how
you
you
do.
engage. You know, the terms under which you choose to engage with people. Right. So,
Yeah, I mean, I know
There's-
early in
yeah.
his career he did what Stephen King did, which is he tried to respond to everyone,
Yeah, that's right.
and he said it just drove him mad. It just you can't do it. He said the irony is you wouldn't get anything actually done. You wouldn't get
No,
any
that's-
writing done, so you know your fan base would go away.
Would you remember that? There
was a gag about that in The Simpsons where it had Marge getting a fan letter back from Ringo like 30 years after she'd written.
Yes. Oh man, yeah, that is the phenomenon, I imagine, isn't it? Because
Pretty much.
I mean, Barker. I mean, people tend to forget these days because he's just not as prolific as he used to be. But
Yeah.
he was like the second saint of horror, wasn't he? You know,
Absolutely was.
next to Stephen
No.
King. You know, that's
Yeah.
where his name was.
Yeah.
At one time, he was right up there, and it's still so recognizable now. People who don't know horror know Clive Barker.
Yeah, absolutely. And and those of us who still follow the genre, he's still one of those kind of Mount Rushmore figures, right? I mean, especially our generation, I guess.
Well, I don't get starstruck. I'm not interested in celebrity or anything like that. I've met a couple of minor like celebrities and whatnot, and I responded to them as people, you know.
Sure, yeah.
But Barker would make me go a wobbly one. He would.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
I would wibble.
Yeah.
I would go absolutely wibbly. I probably would in front of King as well, to be honest.
Yeah. Well, it's that. It's that next level imagination, isn't it? It's just kind of.
Well, I mean, it's so difficult to explain, isn't it? Because, like, especially if you weren't around in the 80s. I mean, I was only a kid in the 80s, but the reason I know King and Barker and all of that, as people who listen to this stuff know, is because of my mum. And this stuff was everywhere.
Yeah.
It was like, you know how when you're a child, there are certain things that are ambient. They are just part of your world. And in the 80s, it was stuff like Michael Jackson, who was friggin' everywhere. I mean, you literally couldn't turn on the TV or listen to the radio without him being there. And King. I mean, King was a phenomena. A literary phenomena, the like of which is... It's hard to explain to people now, isn't it? I mean, you grapple for parallels. You think George R. Martin or J.K. Rowling. I mean, it was that level.
No, absolutely. Or I guess Patterson. I mean, that's it, isn't it? But you're looking at people who produce at that level, and I think. But the fact that it was produced, it was that level of ubiquity, and it was horror. That was the thing that made it so strange.
It's that, isn't it? The fact that it was horror, and also, I mean, I was reading. I can't remember what it was from. It was one of his essays from one of those books that are just compilations of articles and essays and whatnot. And he was talking about how so much of his readership at the time and now are women.
Oh, that's interesting.
Isn't that cool? I mean, I think that's awesome. Cool. That kind of chimes with my own experience of King, because I know my mum read and reads King like he's going out of fashion, basically.
Sure.
She's so easy to buy for. She's so easy to buy for because King is so
especially because the son of a bitch brings out 2 books a year. So
exactly.
That's
Christmas and birthdays, absolutely. Possibly Mother's Day as well.
Yeah, if he's having a good year, you'll get Mother's Day out of it as well.
Sorted. So there's that. But I also know that she would always lend, as well as lending the books to me, she would also lend the books to all of her friends, and they would be buying the books as well. Or they'd had their book club, and they were all talking about the Stephen King that they bought and they've read. That's brilliant.
Yeah, no, it absolutely is, and it's one of the things. I mean, interestingly, the topic under discussion tonight. One of the things that I was thinking about, I felt this very, very strongly when I watched part 1, but it was still there with part 2. In fact, in some ways, more in part 2 because of some of what I think are some of the issues with the storytelling and the pacing. But it in particular, there is actually an iconography that is far bigger than the cultural artifact of the book itself at this point, I think. And one of the things I found fascinating watching part 2 in particular was just feeling the frisson of recognition as some of those artifacts kind of floated by. Sometimes literally on screen.
Quite literally on screen.
Yeah.
Yes.
The I Love Dairy balloons as a good example of that. Silver was a great example of that. As something that, I mean, silver in the book is absolutely pivotal.
Silver's a significant part of Bill's story, is that? I mean, it's like
absolutely,
it's the anchor point, isn't it?
Yeah.
To his childhood, it's the anchor point. It's what brings him back to his dairy self, I suppose. Ultimately.
Yeah, but interestingly, as a kid, it's also what frees him from Derry Self.
Yeah.
Riding Silver's the one time he doesn't stutter, and
Yep.
when he rides Silver fast for a while, he feels free of all of it, free of the pain of his lost brother and his now broken home and his parents' ineptitude and all of that stuff. Silver is his link to the now.
Yeah.
Silver is his link to immediacy and to the moment and to freedom. Silver's an incredible totem, but also a literal. Silver saves his life.
Yeah.
Silver saves Eddie's life. Silver saves Richie's life. And
Yeah.
then at the end of the book, saves his wife as well.
Of course. It's a very complex little metaphor, actually, Silver, isn't it? It's not...
Definitely.
It's not entirely the spirit of childhood or some narrow-minded notion of innocence, because if it were that, it would not have the effect that it does when he's an adult.
No, that's right. I mean, interestingly, given King's kind of, the fact that he's, albeit non-denominational, but given his Christian faith, I mean, I always think Silver's actually quite a kind of, there's something quite zen about Silver.
Yeah, there is something about that bike. It's certainly the way it's presented in the book. And actually, I think for all of its sins, the 1990s TV series actually does Silver quite a lot of justice.
Yeah, I agree.
It's actually much more pivotal in the 1990s adaptation than it is in this one. Simply because there's more of it. There's simply more of it in the 1990s adaptation.
And they keep the subplot with Bill's wife too.
Yes, there's
really
that,
important.
of course, and of course Silver is so important to that one. I mean, it's what redeems her as well. It's what carries. It's an odd thing. It's sort of what carries her away from the deadlights in its own peculiar way. It's like it's suffused with something, isn't it? It's like that whole notion of belief, which is really important in this story. And whatever adaptation you look, whatever version of it you come to, belief and a kind of faith, I suppose, is really important. You're actually getting what you were talking about there, which is King's very, very, very peculiar non-denomination, and it is really odd. It's a kind of Gnosticism, I think, that he's got going on.
It edges out over Gnosticism, definitely. I mean, I don't know. I suspect he might not be too comfortable with that as a label, but I think it really does edge out on that kind of area. Yeah,
I expect he would too, because I don't think he likes it. It's so personal. No. It's so personal.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's like, it reminds me a lot, the when he speaks about it and when he brings it up in his books, it reminds me so much of Blake. It's like someone who has taken the imagery and the ideas of Christianity and has taken the bits that they like, that they've taken the bits that they think are good, which is not a bad thing. I know that people think, cherry picking often comes up in debates about Christianity and about faith and whatnot as a negative. Actually, it's a good thing because it shows that you're using your critical faculties and you have a moral centre.
It's really funny. I did a podcast with Jay Wilburn recently on his Matters of Faith podcast, and that kind of, we didn't go at it at quite that angle because he's a believer. He's I believe born again Christian, so he's quite. He self-describes as a fundamentalist in that sense.
But he's so liberal. He's so considered and clever.
Yeah.
He is in many respects, he defeats the stereotype that one would assume from certain labels.
Yeah. I suspect he would object to the language of cherry picking, and for understandable reasons.
Yes.
But I think what I would say about that is that it does seem to me that if one can reach the kind of political positions and social positions that he and King reach, and as a result of a serious, what they consider to be clearly a very serious study of their faith and a sincere belief in it, then that does indicate to me that tragically it's slightly more complicated than religion bad, atheism good at that
Absolutely,
point, right?
Yeah, it totally is. And I think that's more of a reflection of the reality than sadly, the sort of polar, the bipolar way our discourses work, generally. Certainly on like an internet level, where it is just that. It is just that, my side is good, your side is bad, this person is this person is that. It just doesn't work like that. It is way more complicated. It is way more complicated almost always. Almost always.
And wherever you have trends, you have exceptions, and that's the thing, isn't it? And it's very easy, I think, to paint with a broad brush based on the trends, and I mean, there's some utility value to that. I'm not going to completely decry that as a mode of trying to understand the world, but unless you are consciously always have that mental asterisk of saying, and then there are the exceptions, and then there are the differences, and then there are the complexities. You're not actually doing justice to a view of the world.
No,
and
absolutely
ultimately
not.
You very quickly run the danger of becoming a parody of your own position as well, actually.
Well, yeah, easily. And of course that is what happens. I mean, you only have to look at the sort of what calls itself the free thinking community on YouTube, and
dear God.
on the other side, the fundamentalists. It's a swamp. I mean, it's a mire. Everyone is a parody of themselves. Everyone is insincere. It's appalling. Whereas in what I find in King, I think that King, when he comes to exploring things like metaphysics and whatnot, I think he gets a little bit uncomfortable. Certainly early in his career. I think he gets a little bit uncomfortable. I don't think, unlike Barker, who just goes full tilt, for both of them, just doesn't give a shit and goes full tilt.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
I think King tends to edge around them and explore them in a more subtle way.
I think that's probably true early on. I mean, again, I think that's one of the reasons that it is such an incredible text for me, and why it's still. It may not even be King's best work, but it's unarguably my favourite, and it always will be. I think.
Well, it's an important book to you, isn't it? On a very important. Visceral level, it's an important book to you.
But I think part of the reason for that is what you're articulating there. I do feel like it is the one where he actually does sort of let fly on that side of things.
Probably the earliest one where he does.
Yeah.
There is something.
One of the elements...
Sorry, go on. No, go on.
I was going to say, one of the elements of the book that I find... And it's actually, as we're getting to talk about the film, it's the element of the book that is the most absent from this version, from the latest two-parter movie that's come out. And I think it does cause a severe detriment in the storytelling, and that is that one of the things that it is actually about is about predestination.
Yeah.
Because the kids are drawn to each other, and it is incredibly clear throughout that book that they are being moved by an invisible power. They are being pulled together by something outside of them that is stronger than them, that is, gently but firmly pushing them together.
Yeah, I think the book
forging them as a unit.
Doesn't even comment upon it a couple of times. Not much, but it does actually comment upon that very notion. There are lots of little coincidences that even when they're parted that draw them back together or that place them together, they're kind of the instruments of a wider force, which is the opposite of whatever the hell Pennywise is, the dead lights or whatever the hell he happens to be.
And he describes it. There's a moment when I haven't reread the book recently enough to remember which one, but it's when one of the kids ends up in the group. It might be when they finally meet Mike and after the rock fight.
There's another kid, isn't there?
Yeah, and he. Oh, that's right.
There's
another kid with a speech impediment
who is.
He's got a list.
He's not right.
That's right.
He's not part of this plan, and it doesn't work. There's something about him that throws the mojo off.
Yeah. And there's that thing where, like, Ritchie, I think it's Ritchie's point of view at that point, and he's looking around and he's saying, it's not like we're going to tell him he can't play with the group because we've already got our speech impediment kid, but they just know he's not one of us.
They just know. Because there is a mechanism about these kids, the losers, being together. There's a reason why it's those kids that fight off this monster when so many others have failed, so many others have been devoured.
And it knows it as well, because when you finally get the chapters from its point of view, when you're in book 5, it starts talking about the power of these kids. Something is going on.
It's quite scared, isn't it? It's quite
it gets very nervous.
It's confused. It doesn't know why.
No, that's right. And there's a particularly fine part in when the adults are coming back where it's talking about numbers of power and the fact that because by that point he's whittled them effectively down to 5 because Stan's killed himself then. Is it who's hospitalised? Eddie's hospitalised.
Mike is taken out of the equation.
Of course, it's Mike. Yeah, Mike's hospitalised by Henry.
Henry Bowers.
And it's like 5 is a number of power, but it doesn't have the talismanic quality of 7.
Yeah.
7 was the really dangerous number, and I love all that stuff.
I love that stuff. I mean, it is very hard to communicate. I mean, giving the film the full measure of doubt, it's very hard to communicate that stuff in filmic form. I mean, a lot of the metaphysics of it is actually really hard to communicate outside of the form of a written story. Although, to give it its due, I was surprised, for example, that the film included the ritual of Chud.
Yeah.
I was surprised by that.
That was interesting, wasn't it? And it was an interesting update. I think that
I felt two things about that. One was I kind of I applauded the on paper update idea.
Yeah.
I thought that was fine. I mean, do we need magical Native Americans?
I must admit,
right.
this is one of. I mean, maybe it may have been that this was a conscious reference to a trope that does come up in King a hell of a lot, which even has a name. I'm not going to repeat it on this,
No,
but
right.
it is one that turns up a lot, which is the notion of there being a person of a particular ethnic background. There's sometimes Indians, there's sometimes black, there's sometimes whatever. Who has some especial knowledge of what's going on. So you've got Dick Halloran in The Shining, you've got Mother Abigail in The Stand, you've got...
Yeah.
Are they in the book?
Well,
the Native
John
Americans?
Coffey in the Green Mile.
John Coffey in the Green Mile.
Probably the most egregious example, I'd say, or most obvious example, or the strongest.
It crops up a
example,
lot, so maybe that was a conscious reference. I don't know, but it is something that not only occurs in King a lot, but actually occurs a lot in 1980s horror films. A lot.
It's all over the place, and actually, it comes from I mean, it's funny. I was having a conversation with some friends about this the other day. I had a short story which I've since abandoned because I couldn't get it to work. But I was trying to say, like, I was trying to come up with a magical system.
Yeah.
And I was like, can you think of a way of coming up with a magical system that just isn't inherently tropey?
Yeah.
And problematic because it's always going to lean on some kind of real world thing. And I'm like, no, that's how magical systems in fiction work.
Largely, yes.
That's just what they are. It's irreducible. So you could argue, I guess, fairly, if you're going to have a ritual, it's going to draw from, some culture or other, and it's going to look a bit weird.
And it's going to look like maybe it's, I don't know, maybe it's derived from Hinduism, or maybe it's derived from Native American beliefs, or Celtic beliefs, or Nordic beliefs, or whatever. Yeah, absolutely. But I mean, that's just me playing devil's avocado,
Right, exactly. But I like the notion of you've got to reconnect with being a kid by finding an artifact from your childhood that has relevance to the thing. I thought that was fine.
That was fine. I mean, I could have done without the almost video game structure of it after
I was going to say, my problem with it is it was delivered like a fetch quest.
Yes, it was.
It totally
was. You know what really bothered me about it was, in the book, they go away to rediscover themselves.
That's right.
It's a more abstract quest, which actually more effectively feeds into the themes of both the book and the themes that this film set up. Way more effectively. But for some reason, the filmmakers felt this need to reduce it to a kind of objectified form.
Yeah.
And it felt synthetic to me.
Yeah, I mean, again, I don't think it's necessarily a terrible idea because, TV, obviously, cinema is a visual medium, so having it be about, finding an artifact that's symbolic. And if it had been set up well enough, if the items, which some of them were, obviously the postcard is a...
Well,
because
that
it's in
makes
the book
sense.
and it has that resonance. It's a beautiful thing, isn't it?
That makes a lot of sense. I totally get that. And why that I mean, I also get why that artifact would be charged with so much passion that it could be a weapon. It could be used against it. I totally understand that. But a lot of the others were so token. And
that's exactly the problem.
They weren't set up. That's the other thing. I mean, if they were going to do this, then they could have started it in the previous film.
That was what was necessary, exactly. And this is where we get back to the central problem here with making it a two-film narrative, which was, we know, and this is not secret. This has been like, they didn't know they were going to be having a chapter 2.
Of course they didn't. The first one was an experiment. I mean, in a way, this film is a victim of the first film's success.
Yeah, absolutely.
The first film was a shock surprise to a lot of people. I think a lot of people were really shocked at how popular it was, how much money it made, because it's the first horror film in years, maybe even decades, that's made any kind of decent money at the box office,
I mean, it was the most successful, unadjusted for inflation, it was the most successful box office of a horror movie of all time.
Yeah, right? So...
I mean... the unadjusted for inflation is a very, very important caveat.
Of course, yes.
The Exorcist
is still, The Exorcist is still the one,
But it's still a big deal.
Yeah, it is.
Any way you slice that, that's a massive deal.
And as a result of that, what happened? Yeah. The studios, their eyes lit up and they all turned to it. And unfortunately, they descended upon it. And when I first saw this film, I was really excited, but I was prepared to be disappointed. That's just what you do as an adult when you go and see something that you're invested in, because you might be disappointed. It's just the way it works. And I came out of it initially feeling confused. Because I took my mother, because we do. Whenever there's a horror film or whenever there's a King adaptation, I've got to take my mom. I can't take my boyfriend because he doesn't like him. He doesn't like horror. So, and she was asking, well, what did you think? And I was like, you know what? I don't know.
No.
I honestly don't know. And that's usually a bad sign.
Sure.
Not always. It's not always a bad sign. I needed time to digest. The last time that happened was when I saw Prometheus.
Right.
And that became clear to me very quickly what side of the coin I fell on. And for Prometheus, it was extreme. It was really, It was antipathy, it was hatred. I hate that film, and I still hate it, and I hate it more the more I watch it. It Chapter 2 is different in the sense that I don't hate it, and I still feel very ambiguously about it. There are things about it I really like, and there are things about it that I feel are just the most heinous missed opportunities.
Yeah, and I think I feel very similar. It was very
interesting. Mark Kermode. So he did a conversation with Mayo, as he does.
He does, yes, and there was a difference of opinion.
There was a difference of opinion, which I think we'll want to get back to, I'm sure.
Totally.
But he also did a written review for The Guardian, and the interesting thing was Kermode made it Movie of the Week for The Guardian, but he gave it only 3 stars.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
That is interesting.
I kind of understand where he's coming from. I felt like it did feel like an event.
Mm-hmm.
And as I say, I got this really odd...
I kept getting these frissons of recognition as I saw, as I previously described, the iconography of the book coming through. Often just fleetingly, often not well explained. Often, I mean, silver, I think, is the best emblem of that, where it's there and it gives you a grin. But if you don't know the book, silver, it probably has no relevance.
That's
to
a
you
fair
as a viewer.
point, actually, and it is a problem with this film in general.
I think it is. Yeah, I think there's quite a lot of that going on, and I mean the fact that it's King who sells him silver is just adorable. I went to bits completely.
It is, and there's that consistent joke of the endings, and
that was lovely,
which is a King thing, isn't it? I mean, it's a thing, and I like the fact that he's conscious of it. Again, it's something I feel really ambiguously about, because I loved seeing him. When I saw him, and when I heard his voice, and I went to my mom, you know who that is. I did have that thrill, but at the same time, looking back at it, I'm sort of like, I could do without the winking at the camera all the time.
Yeah, it is indulgent. I mean, there's no question. And look, the other thing as well, I got to say, it's a long film.
It's a long film, but it doesn't feel it.
I tell you what, it feels rushed, or it did to me.
It did to me.
At least the first sort of hour and a half.
Yep.
I actually, funnily enough, I felt the finale dragged.
Yeah, the finale drags a little bit.
There.
No, you're absolutely right. But one of the big problems with the film for me, one of the really big problems, is that it doesn't draw enough distinction between the non-dairy adults and the dairy adults, because they're supposed to be different. Oh,
that's interesting.
That when they're in their lives outside of Derry, and this is actually supposed to be more extreme in the film than it is in the book, you don't get enough of it. I didn't get a sense of who they were just outside of Derry. I wanted to see more of their lives. I wanted to see more of what they were doing in their personal lives, what they were like. I wanted to see more of their professions, particularly certain characters. Certain characters you can get away with just glossing over. Like Eddie, there's not that much, is there, really? Bev needed a lot more.
I mean, Bev's first scene in the book is one of King's all-time tour de force. Mm-hmm. Pieces of writing, as far as I'm concerned. I'll put it up against any single King sequence. It's just an absolutely ferocious, because it's all from her husband's point of view.
Yeah.
And you get the history of their entire relationship, that he remembers while he's going downstairs to get a beer to try and get him over his hangover before he decides to go up and beat the living shit out of his wife because she's smoking a cigarette. And then you have this, it's Tom, isn't it? And then you have this incredibly violent confrontation between the two of them.
I mean, it's actually really violent. In the book, it's way worse.
Yeah, exactly. It's visceral and it's kind of unpleasant, but it's also just a ferocious piece of writing. Absolutely ferocious. And again, I think part of the genius is it's all from Tom's perspective.
Yeah, it's an unusual take, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think it works incredibly well. And this, it's odd. The film gestured at that,
but not. It just didn't have any weight.
It was
did
perfunctory, and it was so fast.
Yeah.
It just went by so quickly.
And after that, in the book, Bev's transition, her arc is really slow. She goes from being this slightly, the rebellions are small. It's the little bits of Bev that actually come out are the smoking, the cigarette, and all of that stuff. But you get none of that here either because there's not enough time to do it. But she goes from being the victim to being Bev. She's just Bev, and once she's Bev, that's it. That's it. She's the same.
Look out world,
yeah, exactly.
Right?
She is the same throughout the entire running time, and it did rob her, I thought, of impetus and dynamism. I thought it made her quite flat in this.
Yeah,
one.
I found her flat as well, and related to that, I think, unfortunately, because when I did the first trailer, it was the scene with Kirsch, when she goes to her father's flat and finds out he's dead, and the thing is, the way the trailer was cut, I thought, oh man, they've nailed it.
Me too.
That looks awesome.
Me too.
It was very much not awesome for me. I'm afraid.
No, nor me. I liked that sequence right up until it started to kick off.
They blew the reveal. They completely blew the reveal.
And also,
and it just...
did it need to be a bad CG monster?
No, it did not. It did not need to be a 10-foot tall naked. It looked like the woman from The Shining. It looked like another shout out to me. It looked like the woman from the bath in The Shining. It's like, don't do that.
And also, what has that got to do with Bev?
Exactly.
What has that got? Why would Pennywise take that form?
Yeah.
I mean, it makes way more sense for him to turn into for Kirsch to turn into like a semblance of her dead father, doesn't it?
Right. Which is what happens in the book.
Exactly.
It's absolutely terrifying.
Yeah, I worry about you a lot, Bevy.
Yeah,
all
exactly.
that
You
stuff.
get that whole sequence.
It's
great. That's actually, in the book, he goes way deep. In the book, he tears the lid off the entire pathology of her father, and it's really fucking terrifying. It's again just genuinely disturbing. But you wouldn't have needed to go that far in the film to make it work.
Not at all.
I'm with you. Why do we need that? Because elsewhere, some of the creature design stuff was fine. I like the leper a lot.
Yep.
I thought the leper looked great.
Yeah, the leper was really cool.
But when it vomits the black shit in Eddie's face, I was just like, oh my
It's
God.
one of the few, it's a problem that a lot of people have brought up, and it is certainly one that's here. There are so many gags in the horror. There are so many gags that undercut the horror. And that is actually one of the gags. It is quite funny in its own gruesome way. But I actually really liked that one.
Yeah, that one worked. Now, this is interesting, isn't it? Because this is something, this is obviously something you talked about in your essay, and this is something that Kermode talked about, both in his essay and in that conversation with Mayo. And this is something I did want to get into. So there's a tonal problem, right? I think we're all agreed that there's
principally,
a clash.
Beyond any problem that this film has, the tone is so problematic.
Yeah, and it's odd because the tones that it vacillates between, I think, are like genuinely, intensely, viscerally scary and violent and unpleasant, and then the kind of teen summer horror movie Final Destination stuff,
the jokey sort of Halloween stuff,
yeah, which is can still be gross and can still be jumpy, but it's not. It's a totally different register, and it's a totally different.
Well, you look at
film.
it. The way I looked at it, I stepped back from the film and I looked at it as a whole. I looked at it holistically, basically, and you look at the subject matters that this film touches on. You've got sequences, however truncated, that deal with obviously homophobic assault and murder. You have domestic violence. You have suicide and depression. You have repressed sexual identity. You have loneliness. There's so much here. These are big, serious issues. And if you're going to tackle any one of them in a story, you need to pay it off. You need to do it well. You need to show it some respect. But around them, you have these bizarre tonal leaps and cushions where it suddenly switches from being very dark, very adult, very serious, to being this carnivalesque, slightly funny story, you know? And for me, that doesn't work.
And it's very interesting. So there's a specific scene that Kermode talks about, and I can't remember. I can't remember if you wrote about this.
No, I might have referred to it passingly.
So this is about no. I'm talking about the scene in the Chinese restaurant.
Oh, right, that one. Yeah.
So this is quite. Yeah, no, we'll get to it.
All right.
I'm sure we'll get to it. So there's the scene in the Chinese restaurant.
Yeah.
Now this is a scene that's in all three versions. It's in the book. It's in the miniseries adaptation, and it's in this film. And it's a classic set piece horror in all three.
Yeah.
And I loved the chapter 2 version. I really did. I loved them getting to know each other.
Yep.
That was one of the few times where the kind of truncated, speeded up storytelling kind of worked, I felt, because you had them just exchange jokes.
Yeah.
And you're sort of slipping back into the characters themselves as kids.
This is it, isn't it? They're becoming themselves again. They're becoming the losers again. How they are to one another, which is not how they should be in the outer world, you know?
Yeah.
I liked that, and I like it really highlights something that I've got a problem with, which is I love the ideas.
Yeah.
But I just don't like their execution.
But this is the thing, because the way that scene ends in the book is the fortune cookies burst out their horrors, they cover it up. The waitress comes back in and they have to pretend to be normal.
Yeah.
While all this shit's going on the table. And it's brilliant because suddenly it cuts from being this kind of, this horror set piece, and then they're just like, and the real horror is we're the only ones that can see
this
it.
Is
the real
it.
horror is
This is
whereas it ends in chapter 2 movie just a straight up gag.
It's a gag.
And
it's a total gag.
Fucking funny.
Yeah.
I mean, it really made me laugh, because he's standing there banging the table with a chair and it just says, "Can we get the check?" I mean, it's funny.
It is funny, but it's
it completely kills the menace.
It kills the horror, doesn't it? It actually kills the horror, and it kills the tensions that actually inform the themes of this story,
Yeah, that's right.
Because that's the point, isn't it? They can see it because it's them. There is still something of their child selves in them. But nobody else can. That's part of the themes of this story, In order to kill the thing that is it, they've kind of got to kill themselves. They've got to kill their childhood self so it has no power over them. That's kind of the point. But this film consistently murders that theme. Consistently.
Yeah. And the thing about that is that's fine if you don't want to go that way with a thing, that's fine. The story is, Christ knows, the story is big enough. If you want to find alternative ways through this labyrinth of ideas and you want to express different things, you can. I mean, again, one of the things that did frustrate me about part 2, and I know this is a symptom of the fact that there wasn't going to be a part, they didn't know they were going to be doing a part 2 and they did part 1, but there are certain things, certain ideas do not really get paid off. Like, for example, one of my favourite things about part 1 was when they got into its den, and instead of a spider, you had these children floating.
Loved that.
In the air. The idea that when it's hibernating, what it's doing is slowly eating its way through the children that it's kidnapped throughout its... That's a great idea. That's really, it's a different... But they didn't do anything.
They did nothing
not only did it not get paid
it.
off, it didn't come back at all. Instead, you have this very strange jump cut at the opening of the film, after the opening scene, where Henry is delivered from the sewers on this tidal wave of children's corpses.
I was confused by that. I actually did not know what was happening.
What is going on?
I didn't know it jumped. I had no idea it jumped. I thought that was Melon. Initially, I was like, "What? What the hell is going on?"
The actual and it was again. I mean, it was an incredible image. I mean, it really was a very, very striking image and very disturbing. And coming off the back of the previous scene, it kind of carried that tone through. You're like, "Fucking hell, they're really going for it this time." But then it's a dream, and it's Henry waking up in the hospital, and it's like, well, what did happen to those kids who were floating around? Did the losers rescue them, or did they die? Or,
did they just... Yeah, that's a fair point, actually. What did happen to them? Did they, float down after, or disperse, or what? What is the... Yeah, there is a massive thing there that's not paid off.
Once you start...
Yeah, and once you start picking at this scab, it just gets worse, because then you're like, so why did he eat Georgie?
Yeah.
Why did he eat Georgie as opposed to take him? Why did he actually kill him?
Yeah, that is a problem, isn't it? It's almost like they threw it in because someone thought, oh, that's a cool image.
Well, they threw it in because it's the opening scene of the book, and it's iconic.
No, I mean the children floating.
Oh, the children floating. Sorry,
it's
yeah,
almost
right.
like someone thought, well, that'd be a cool image to throw in at the end. Why don't we throw that in?
It's fine if you're only making one movie.
Yes.
It's absolutely fine. It works as a standalone item. But as soon as you're coming back for part 2 and you don't pay it off...
When you're returning to exactly the same site, you know?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right.
It's a problem, isn't it? It really is.
It is a problem.
And it frustrates me so much. I mean, I'm sure people listening to this will think that we hate the film. I'm sure that's what they're going to think, because there are so many criticisms and they're so heartfelt. I don't hate the film, personally.
No.
I don't hate it. I'm disappointed by it.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, I mean, there's a part of me that's just happy that it is still considered a vital enough story in 2019 that people want to try and do something with it. I mean, that just feels good to me, because I think it is one of those kind of stories.
Well, it does have certain themes. I mean, I don't like the notion of universal themes. I don't think they exist, but it does have themes that carry over very, very well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Unfortunately, I do feel that the film wussed out on some of its potential commentaries. I mean, we obviously, politically now, both in the US and the UK, there is this massive tension between the old and the young, which is something that exists in the book enormously. It is so clear in the book. It's actually quite clear in the 1990s TV adaptation as well, for all of its faults. Here, they reference it in the first film, and then it's just gone in the second film. I mean, it is gone.
Yeah.
It's not there. The notion
also...
that Derry is somehow sick, that there is a human sickness in Derry, that people are indifferent to the atrocities, the behind the picket fences stuff, which is of course King's social commentary. It just isn't there. Not for any. I didn't think it was anyway. You know.
I mean, one of the central concerns of the book that I think King very deliberately and very brilliantly leaves unresolved is the degree to which it is parasitic and a degree to which it's actually a symbiote.
Yeah.
You know, it's a symbiotic relationship between it and the town. Because he describes the town as having this kind of quiet prosperity.
Yeah.
And there's this whole kind of thing about, like, to a certain degree, are the adults maybe subconsciously meeting it halfway?
Yeah.
You know, is there a kind of Faustian bargain of just like, you know, yeah, okay, kids get killed every few years, and tempers are short in this town, and but you know, we get to do what we want to do, and everything's okay.
It does come up, doesn't it? There is it's not overt. It's not like a conspiracy theory. It's not like the townspeople are some sort of cult, and they assign children to be devoured or anything like that.
No, nothing.
It's way more unconscious than that, and that makes it worse. It's way more insidious.
That's what's so brilliant about it, because what it becomes then, I mean, if to get to use our kind of terms in 2019 in terms of politics, it's kind of about, that's kind of one of the ways that privilege functions.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, like in society, is that it's the ability to be able to close your eyes to injustice, to be able to turn away because it doesn't affect
you. Exactly.
Right.
Your demographic isn't going to be affected, so you don't care. Yeah, totally.
So you don't have to care. You have the choice. You have the luxury of saying, I'm going to engage with this today or I'm not.
Yeah.
Right. And that is the thing about that kind of privilege, is that it's so insidious because it's not something you have any choice over.
Exactly.
You're born with that or you're not, and you grow up with it or you don't.
It's culturally reinforced, isn't it? It is part of.
It's completely culturally
you don't
reinforced.
Even.
But it means that
you don't know it's there. You don't.
Not unless you
sit there and think. You know.
Exactly. Unless you do the work to consciously interrogate it, you're not even aware it exists. And even if you do that, I mean, let's be honest. We all have days where we're like, you know what, I'm not going to think about that, and I don't have to.
Yeah.
Because whatever that is, it's not something that's currently kicking my door down.
Exactly.
Right? And we've all done that.
Of course we do.
Everyone. I don't care who you are. We've all done that.
You have to. You have to, for sanity's sake, I think, to a certain degree.
I think this gives us, if you don't mind, I'd like to use that as a jumping off point to talk about the Adrian Melon scene.
Yeah, sure. I mean, this is a very infamous scene from the book. I think, I mean, we discussed this in the 2006... Was it 2016 when we did the last podcast?
It might well have been.
It might well have been. The one where we talked about, ladies and gentlemen, we talked about the book and the 1990s adaptation and the 2016 which is now chapter 1. we did discuss the Adrian Melon scene, which is a massively infamous scene from the book, which is actually derived from a real life murder that happened in Maine, I believe.
That's correct. Yeah. I believe in '84. Yeah.
Yep, which year I was born, interestingly, which involved the assault and murder of a young gay man who was thrown over a bridge after being brutally beaten. Now, the 1990s adaptation made the decision to just leave it out. Yep. They just didn't even go there, which is probably a good idea. It's a very difficult thing to render. It's an even more difficult thing to get right. Now, that's basically the opening scene from this film. There is a tiny little like teaser before that involving images from the previous film, but that is the opening scene from this film. And I took it as a kind of mission statement. Yeah. When I saw it, because I found it really powerful, I found it really emotive, I found it very, I hesitate to use the word traumatic, but what happens is you tend to think, well, the automatic thing is you go back to things in your past where it could have been you, it could have so easily been you, or you place yourself or your loved ones in that position. And I thought, okay, this is where it's going. This is what the film is going to be now. It is going to be this really dark, adult, very gritty, very real film about adult terrors and about genuine adult phenomena, And I also sat there thinking, okay, film, you've got to really impress me now. You've got to pay it off. Because it made me feel things, it made me feel things, which is no bad thing. I absolutely want a horror film in particular. I want all films to make me feel things. And I don't mind if that's negative or positive. I actually don't mind if it brings up trauma. I don't mind if it brings up, if it makes me feel angry or afraid or whatever. I actually don't mind at all. And this sequence runs the gamut. It's brutal, it's infuriating, it's violent, it's unpleasant. It's actually quite well rendered. In isolation, it's really well done,
Yeah.
Unfortunately, there is nothing like it in the rest of the film. There is nothing that hits the same tone. There is nothing that has even a slither of the same brutality as this. There's nothing that even references similar themes. The big problem for me, one of the biggest problems, is not only the tonal inconsistency. It's the fact that, unlike in the book, it doesn't pay off mythologically, and it doesn't pay off narratively. It floats in this strange isolation, where I sat there questioning why it was there. And then you have the other problem, whereby it's surrounded by this film that's largely made up of jokes, that's largely made up of horror gags and quips and whatnot. And I'm like, this is insulting.
We've discussed so far, right? The tonal dissonance there is massive.
This is insulting. Okay, this is insulting. It has the effect of making the phenomena of homophobia and really vicious, lethal assault seem not that much, really. Just not be that important, really.
And it sits very oddly alongside what otherwise frequently is horror as entertainment.
Yeah, right.
And again, to be clear, we are two people who are quite happy to sit and watch horror as entertainment.
Totally,
right?
Totally.
It's not about an inherent dislike or distaste for that as a form of cinema.
I really want to make it clear that this is, as I did in the article, this is not an argument for censorship because of violence or because of brutality. I don't mind that at all in any kind of film. I really don't. It's just that if you're going to bring up issues like, for example, homophobic assault, if you're going to bring up racism, if you're going to bring up rape, if you're going to bring up domestic abuse, if you're going to bring up suicide for that matter, you need to show it some respect. You need to make it pay off. You need to make it have a reason to exist, at least like a narrative reason or something. Here it doesn't. In the book it does, because it's the assault is what brings Pennywise back to life. Essentially, he's been hibernating this entire time, and the assault, the sort of the raw negativity of it, is what brings Pennywise back to life. And you know what? How easy would that have been to render, and how effective would that have been to render in this scene? Just leave it as it was shot, and as the really graphic blows to Adrian Melon's face are occurring, have it cut away and have a heart beating, or have an ember of the deadlights pulsing.
Yeah, the eyes open.
Yeah.
I mean, whatever. There's any number of ways.
Any number of ways they could have portrayed it, but here it's actually made clear that it doesn't wake up Pennywise because he's already around.
Now, this is interesting. So, again, I just want to go back to the context of the novel. It's worth positioning this scene in the novel, because you're right. It's an absolutely massive deal. It's the second chapter of the novel. So the first chapter of the novel is the death of Georgie, which, as we already discussed, is the opening scene of part one, and it kind of had to be.
Yeah. So actually, now that I think about it, you've got a scene involving quite brutal child murder, and then a scene involving quite brutal homophobic assault and murder. One after the other.
So they do. The two scenes do mirror each other in that sense, and narratively, that's why they're there. I think, and I think that I think the murder of Adrian Melon is a gigantically important part of the narrative of the book, and it should have been equally as important a part of part two.
Yeah.
And whilst it is every bit the visceral horror you've described to watch, it is every bit as uncomfortable. It doesn't carry the necessary narrative weight.
It doesn't. It really
for a scene
doesn't.
that is that horrific, and that's I think the failure. Now, I do want to say that, and the reason that I wanted to come onto this, having started talking about privilege, is what I would say, not in its defence, but just as a kind of a different perspective on seeing it, was for me as a straight guy seeing it and sitting there with my stepson who's just turned 18, just about to go to university, and who, as far as I know, is straight as well. To see a scene like that and be confronted with a reality that I don't have to think about every day. I think there was some value to that.
Yeah,
because it was. I cannot. It was so uncomfortable.
It is
to watch.
uncomfortable to watch.
It's really it's as brutal a scene, and the thing about it is what differentiates it from all the stuff we've talked about, in the rest of the film, is the rest of almost all of the rest of violence. There is actually one other scene which I do want to talk about, which I think is somewhat comparable, but the vast majority of the rest of the violence in this horror movie is explicitly horror movie violence. It's horror action set pieces. And and all of with all of the things that implies, the prosthetics, the effects, the kind of the build to the jump scare, all of that stuff. This is none of that.
No.
This is a really brutal, raw, physical confrontation. It is incredibly naturalistic.
This is it. It could be from a different film, couldn't it? I mean,
it really could. It's got more in common with American History X than it does with the rest of the film. Now, I don't have an objection to accurate depictions of violence. I actually think it's a morally important thing to do.
Absolutely.
If you're going to do it, and again, as I say, for me watching it, there was a kind of like, my kind of internal dialogue was very much like, no, you fucking watch this, dude, because you don't have to worry about this shit.
Yeah.
And people you care about do, so you fucking watch this and you just deal with it. And that was, I think there was a merit to it on that level. But I do share your frustration that it didn't go on to be that kind of film. It did, It didn't then go on to commit to that.
This is the big problem, and I know there is a problem with criticizing the film that you want to exist rather than the one that does exist. I get that.
No, of course,
But and I believe we even discussed this in the last podcast. One of the things I was hoping they were going to do with this film is, since they had split the films between the childhood sections and the adult sections, they were going to make the 2016 film the child horror film, where you can get away with the horror jokes and the japes and the slightly sillier, slightly more Halloween-like ghost train ride shocks and horror sequences, and the adult one was going to take it in the other direction. So it was going to be this visceral, dark, violent film about adult horrors. It was going to be much more serious and much more meaningful, just to demonstrate the difference between what a child is afraid of and what an adult is afraid of, which would have fit the themes that they were going for really, really well, would it not? On a metaphorical level, it would have fit really, really well. Unfortunately, that's not what happens. Outside of these odd, isolated scenes, you have the Adrian Melon murder, which is by far the most adult and most serious scene in the entire film. The entire film. And the rest, almost every scene after that, barring one or two slight exceptions, is just the horror set pieces with the jokes and the japes and the visual gags. And it echoes the first film way too much. And not only that, I'd say this film goes further with the jokes and the japes. I can actually almost feel I would assume that a lot of that is due to what we were talking about earlier with the problems with the first film's success, whereby you have pressures from outside, so you have studio execs and whatnot saying you've got to make it more like this, but the first film was really successful, you've got to put more gags in it, you've got to make it funny, we don't want to alienate people, so put this in it, put that in it. That's what I feel. I can feel the soul of a good film straining to get out here.
Yeah,
I really can. It's just buried under so much muck, and it would have been so easy to be angry about the Adrian Melon scene, and I was frustrated with it because I thought that it paid phenomena like homophobia and assault really short shrift. I thought it was it's the oddest thing, because I know for a fact that the filmmakers and everyone involved, they're not homophobes, they're not, not by any stretch of the imagination. They're trying, actually, I do believe sincerely, to present a comment on homophobia. As a result, also, there's other subplots and scenes in the film that bear that out. But it's just so ham-fistedly done that it actually comes off as rather insulting and actually mildly homophobic.
Yeah, I think that they intended to make me feel the way I did as I was watching it, right? Yeah. That was the intention. The intention was to go to the audience like, hi, here's some really horrendous, heinous shit that happens in real life. And I'm fine, perhaps even good, but it is just... And I guess we've got to talk about Ritchie, right?
Yeah,
because that's
absolutely.
The other thing that kind of ties in.
This is exactly what I was talking about earlier. Love the idea.
Yeah.
Love the idea. Hate the execution.
I wouldn't go so far as to say hate, but I think for me the failure was fundamentally that there's no way they were thinking this when they made Palm.
Oh, God, no. No, and I don't think
that's why it doesn't work. Because you can't retrofit that. No. You just can't.
No,
it's not. And if they had, I think it could have been absolutely fucking brilliant.
They could have built it up way more.
Great idea.
Yeah,
but
totally. There was so much they could have done with Ritchie in the first film to weave that in, especially if his feelings for Eddie. They could have done so much with that, and of course because it wasn't even a concept, and so clearly not even a concept back then.
That's right.
It just doesn't work. It doesn't pay off, and it's slightly, the way it's executed in this film is slightly mawkish and slightly kind of, it doesn't have enough weight or impact to make it a proper arc.
You know what? It's actually, I'm afraid to say it, and I really like the idea, but it was perfunctory.
Yeah, it was.
It really was.
And
it's really, really unfortunate.
I was thinking about this earlier. They could have done so much, not only with Ritchie, but with Eddie as a result of this.
Yeah, that's right. Absolutely.
Let's have a look at stereotypes of gay men in the 1980s when they grew up. And what, in the book, when Eddie sees the leper for the first time, what does he say? He actually tries to assault, he tries to insinuate sexual stuff, doesn't he? Because Eddie's obviously got loads of hang-ups about that too.
Yeah.
So what if they'd included a scene in the new film, or where Ritchie maybe, I don't know, tried to kiss Eddie or something. He actually tried to do something, and as a result of that, not only did you get increased tensions between Eddie and Ritchie, but Eddie's fears, like the leper and whatnot, started to take on aspects of Ritchie.
Yeah.
Would that not have been really interesting? And then you could have resolved that at the end with Eddie's death. Yeah?
Yeah, absolutely. There's so much you could do with it, and it. I mean, the thing is, this kind of reinforced for me, Ritchie's probably my favourite of the gang.
Oh God, I really like, even despite the problems with the arc they've introduced for him, steals the film.
Oh my God, and it's a great it's a great performance.
It really is, in the same way that Finn Wolfhard did the first one.
Yes, absolutely. They both stole the show for me, and it is partly the writing. I still think, I remember my last reread of the novel. I still think Bill's kind of a bit of a cipher.
Yeah.
Ben I like a lot as well.
Yep.
Because I've got a real thing for that unrequited love story. I just do. That's always going to be my jam.
Yeah.
And King writes that stuff about as well as anyone.
Yep.
And Ben's story is achingly beautiful.
Yeah.
And it works because Ben is so non-toxic.
Yeah.
That's why it works.
He's a very wholesome character, isn't he?
There's a purity to it. You know what I mean? Especially because they're prepubescent, so it really is like his love for Bev is just this really pure, lovely thing.
Yeah.
He's never creepy about it. He's never weird about it. He's never resentful about it. But it's just so that, and I think that worked as well. And actually, the resolution between those two, the sequence itself, I felt was just a little overwrought. But again, conceptually, those two, the way they came together, I actually really liked that. I thought that was kind of well done.
Yeah,
but you just, you can't, this idea for Ritchie, and again, it's like half the problem is you didn't have any of that in your mind when you wrote part one, and it shows.
And you obviously didn't have time to flesh it out properly.
And you didn't have time to flesh it out.
That much is so clear. It's so clear. It's a lovely idea.
It is a great idea because it introduces a genuinely new dynamic to the group.
Yeah.
It kind of, there's a way in which it kind of makes a bit more sense of Ritchie too, right?
Yeah.
It kind of gives a motivation for some of his more kind of outlandish, weird kind of, that kind of, that kind of desperation to fit in, but also a need to be to not fit
well,
in.
It explains why he's so mouthy and why he's such a clown as a kid. It explains a lot. It's a kind of defense mechanism,
Look, if you really were going to go for it too, what you'd do is you'd reintroduce some of the homophobic stuff that he said.
Yeah.
Right?
Oh, yeah.
And he'd be saying it as cover. You could do that, actually, if that's what you were going for.
There's so much.
Again,
There's so
you'd need to
much.
know you were going to do that.
Yeah.
You'd need to have it planned out.
Again, lovely idea. But missed opportunity. Oh, it's so frustrating. It really is.
And you know what? And I still liked it. I've got to be clear about that.
Yeah.
The closing sequence where he goes to the kissing bridge and he does it got me.
Yeah.
It moved me. I was like, that's really sweet.
Yeah.
That's really lovely. And what I found myself doing is then just headcanoning the whole thing.
But you know what?
So that it was actually there.
It is lovely, but it's like I want to see more than that. I just want to see more than that. I wanted to see a confession. I wanted to see a kiss. I wanted to see something, because it comes off as just too little. It's like, come on. And
it is too little for how big it is, right? That's the thing. If that's really what's going on the whole time, then that's massive.
Yeah, and why not? Why not use it? Really, the end of the film, where it really goes for the notion that belief is ultimately what is going to kill this thing, or what is going to let it kill you. That's a really powerful thing they could have used.
Yeah, that's right.
But they don't.
But the metaphysics are muddled too. So this is something else I wanted to get into. The confrontation at the end of the first movie. The reason they can defeat the clown, the reason they can hurt him and knock him back down the well, is because they stop being scared of him. And the metaphysics of it in part one is it actually can only kill you if you're scared of it. And that's fine. That's different for the book, but it's fine. And it's a coherent metaphysics. Obviously, the metaphorical implications are quite clear, and it works. But then that all goes out the window in the second movie, and suddenly it doesn't matter how scared you are of it at all.
No.
What matters then, suddenly what they hit on is what the kids in the book hit on somewhere around the end of book 4, which is it is limited by the rules of the form it takes.
Yeah.
And that's how you make it vulnerable.
Yeah, which is it's fine, you know.
It's fine.
It's fine, but then
But
you
fucking
have...
pick one.
Yeah, this is it.
Pick one of those metaphors.
Pick
you can't
it.
have them both.
Yeah, pick which one it
incoherent.
is. And also,
Yes.
they do some weird things with it in that final sequence. Like, Bev... I remember having this whiplash moment in the final sequence where... Bev, like, exposits, like, really awkwardly, let's force him back down the hole so he has to get small. And I just thought, is that what they're actually going to do? That would suck. And, of course, they don't. He blocks the exit so they can't. And I'm like, well, that doesn't make any sense either. Why? It feels like a tactic to prolong this sequence, and it makes no sense, and it's a silly idea. Why not? If you know its belief, if you know that that's what does it, just will it to be small, you know?
You know, that was the exact moment in the end sequence where I caught myself reaching for my phone to see what the time was.
Yeah.
And that's unforgivable to be at the point of like, how much longer is this going to run?
Absolutely.
You know, to be thinking that at that point.
At that
film,
point, yeah. And
it's really
again,
disappointing.
you've got glimmers of good ideas. I love the notion of the losers having to face like the apex of all their fears, you know?
Yeah.
The psychological battle, awesome. Love that to bits. That's what it always should have been. I love Bill having to kill his childhood self in order to be who he's supposed to be, you know?
Now, there's a scene that got some shit too.
Really?
Some of the fans were not happy
Really?
about that. There was a feeling that it actually betrayed Bill's character.
Oh, okay.
So the logic goes. I completely disagree with it. Just to be clear, but it's worth expressing because it's interesting. So the feeling is that by claiming that Bill wasn't actually ill.
Oh, right. Okay.
On the day that Georgie died, it actually kind of makes Bill the bad guy. That's the thing, is it turns Bill into this less than kind of wholesome or but for me it was like, I was like, you've just fucking humanised him. Are you kidding me?
Yeah.
I loved it, because my big problem with Bill is precisely that he's this completely perfect big brother figure, and it's just like, no one's like that.
Well,
no one is like that.
It anchors his guilt a bit more, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. No, I thought it was a really, really smart
I like it.
bit of storytelling.
I like it.
Yeah.
I think that's a really good... And that sequence was great. I love that sequence.
Was great. That was so well executed, because we'd seen it in part. That was one of the few times when you felt like it was coherent, because we'd seen that scene from the kid's point of view in part one. To insert adult Bill into that scene, I mean, just the idea of that was brilliant. To have him effectively in the position of the clown coming out of the water.
Yeah, very clever.
I mean, when that image hit, I was like, wow,
this
clever. Is fucking interesting.
And
this is interesting.
You know, when they do, I mean, the director is talking about doing like a massive supercut, isn't he? Where he
is. 6-hour supercut.
He intercuts it with the first film. That is going to work really well.
You know, the rumour is he shot extra footage.
You can tell, can't you? You can tell. There's so much cut out of this film. You can practically see the ragged edges where the scissors have been on the cells. You know, I know they don't do it like that anymore, by the way. It's a metaphor. But
the story I heard was it was a 4-hour cut.
Yeah, you can see. It's such a rushed film.
Absolutely.
It's such a rushed film. But I also didn't like... I mean, I feel like I'm really coming down hard on this film. I didn't like the pot, the MacGuffin pot that they try to force it into.
Well, because we're back to the fetch quest, aren't we? We're back to that. And I have to say, related to that, whilst I liked the kind of... I admired the kind of moxie of saying, oh, we're not going to do the spider, and then totally doing the spider with the clown head.
The spider.
I loved it. Funnily enough, the image of the giant spider with the clown head, I was completely okay with. I thought, but my big problem was like just looking at it and going, it's a fucking end of level boss.
It's an end of level boss. It so is.
And it's just like, that's just a bit disappointing.
Come on,
you know, that's like, I don't want it to be the end of level boss.
The thing is,
I want it to be something more than
as well, we've had, in the time since it was published, we've had Resident Evil, Silent Hill, we've had Dark Souls, Bloodborne. We've seen worse end of level bosses than this.
Frankly,
you know.
You're not wrong. Yeah, I mean, its attack patterns weren't even particularly exciting.
They really
That was the thing. You were like,
I mean, if you'd ever played Dark Souls, you could have beaten that fucker with a stick.
do you know what I mean? I'd have beaten him in like 10 minutes.
You know what? Fuck it. I'd have done
like
the whole
3 goes.
YouTube thing. I'd have taken off all my armor and beat it naked with my fists. Live streamed it.
Yeah.
The spider's always been a problem for me. In the
Right.
book, it's not so bad. In the book, the reason it's not so bad is because the spider is almost metaphorical.
Well, no, it's explicitly. I mean, that's the thing. What they say in the book is like there's the line in is Bill says in his own mind. It's like Bill understood that this was not what it looked
Yeah.
like. But this was the closest approximation their minds could.
Yes,
cope with.
yeah.
And this was the final form that it would live or die.
It's
in, that they
Lovecraftian,
had to
isn't
engage
it?
with. Yeah, exactly. And because it's really the deadlight.
It's the deadlights, yeah, and
Yeah.
don't get me wrong, there are little visual cues in this encounter in It Chapter 2 where it does seem to make that overt, and I kind of liked that, where the deadlights
One of my favourite moments where the back of its head opened
Yeah.
up and the lights were behind it and he had the row of teeth and the screaming.
Yeah.
I was like, okay, yeah, that's fucking
I
brilliant.
liked that.
I love that.
I really liked that, and I love the swirling deadlights behind it as they're sort of pouring out of its mouth.
Yeah.
I liked that. I thought that was great. But for me, what they could have done, I mean, and I know it's a sort of end of summer blockbuster to a sequel to a very successful film. They would have never done it this way, but they should have made it way more abstract.
Yeah, it's difficult, isn't it? Because I do think. There's all the jokes about the endings. I'm quite happy to go to bat for the ending of It
Yeah.
as a novel. I actually think it's far better than. It's nowhere near his most egregious ending. I actually think it's fine.
God,
I think it works dramatically.
in context with King's endings,
Yeah.
it's fine.
No, it's fine.
It's fine.
I actually think it's quite good.
Yeah.
For King ending standards, it's good, which means it's adequate by most.
Yeah,
people's
it's
standards.
fine.
But the spider is unfilmable. The
Totally.
last, the big confrontation between the kids and the adults and its final form, the ritual of Chud as expressed in the book, it's
Unfilmable. It is. They should.
So what are you going to do?
You got to do something.
They should have. I mean, for my money, they should have gone with the abstract. They should have gone with the notion that this thing is now going to attack them on an adult level. It's not going to be a big monster. It's going to attack them in terms of what they're truly afraid of as adults. All of their buried psychoses, their buried problems as adults, That's what it's going to go for. It should have done. I mean, it almost went there. It almost went there where you do get them, suffering or the climax of all of their fears from childhood. It should have been that, but less sort of in your face, more subtle. I would have gone for that.
Because one of the themes of the book
Is that it predates King, obviously the same, but the child
is the father of the man, right?
Yeah.
That is, or woman, and that is an absolute theme of it. It's about how they, even though they are wildly successful in their chosen fields, every one of those adults is absolutely defined and indeed imprisoned.
Yeah.
By the children that they were and the trauma they experienced.
Yes, that is a central theme of the book, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's about, in many respects, it's about demolishing the myth of childhood innocence. It's actually saying to you that the ghost of the child and the children that you were are actually haunting you.
It's way stronger than that. They're not haunting you. They own you. They devour you. They control you, and you don't even realize.
Sort of poisoning
that's the
you.
Thing. They're the ones in the driving seat, and you don't even know. I mean, that's what I love about it. I mean, that's why Ritchie is so key to me, because Ritchie has that whole line. It's one of my favourite lines in all of King, where he talks about the secret to success is to find the little bastard who's running around in your head, making your life miserable.
Yeah.
And you get your fucking hands around his neck, but you don't kill him. You put him on a treadmill, and you make him work for you.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great
that's it.
line. It's a great line because it's so psychologically true.
Yeah, it's psychologically sound, but it's also, that's the psychological story of the entire Losers Gang.
Yeah.
They all find their own version of that.
Yeah.
But that thing that they've trapped and it is working for them is also their own childhood and their own trauma that they can't get beyond.
Yeah.
So it's their prison as much as it's their salvation, and I love that.
I like that
really,
too, and
that's rich, that's complicated, that's messy, and that's great.
I totally love it, and I wanted more of it. I wanted more of it here because the film does just broach on it. it broaches on it several times, and then it pulls back, and it opts for the easy option, which is the horror set piece with the gag at the end.
I mean, the Kirsch sequence, I think, is so emblematic. It was the first. The first third, first half of that, whatever it was. I'm like, oh shit, yeah, here we go. And then I was really like, I don't know if I actually groaned out loud when I saw the 20-foot wall, but I was like, oh, come on.
Yeah, I had a moment, and there were a couple of sequences like that, where it was like, oh.
On the flip side, though,
going back to, as a positive,
there
was one of the other, actually, the only other two sequences that I felt came anywhere near to that opening scene were the other two child murders.
Yeah. Now, again, this is another thing that the film includes quite a lot of, actually, which is child murder,
Yeah. So there's the sequence in the funhouse, which is entirely new. There's nothing remotely comparable to that in the book, and I thought that was great.
Yep.
I thought that worked really well.
Makes sense,
Oh god, Pennywise bashing his head against the glass to crack it was great. That was genuinely like, even before the big kind of the closing shot. That was like,
great sequence. Great sequence.
It was great, but the other one that I think was even better and I think, I don't know, it could be my favourite sequence in the film, was the girl with the birth.
Oh yeah.
And Pennywise's effectively seduction of her, really.
It was.
And what I loved about that was it took. So one of the things that we talked about, one of the things I always fuck up in the adaptations of it is the clown is not meant to be scary.
Yeah.
The clown is meant to be bait.
Yeah.
The clown is meant to appear as the children's friend, draw them in, and then when it's too late, then it reveals itself. That's the whole point of the clown.
Now, the movie's obviously gone a different way with that.
Yeah.
Pennywise is scary as shit.
But what I love about it in this sequence is how they play into that.
Mm-hmm.
And they use his own scariness as the trap. So he's, he does that whole thing about crying, about being ugly, and it's just, I was like, okay, this is fucking smart.
Yeah.
This is really, really smart. And I thought that was a great sequence. And it was particularly good because you were simultaneously, really just impressed with the kind of the empathy.
Yeah.
And the kindness of this child, and absolutely horrified of what you knew was going to happen as a result of that. And I thought, now this is, and again, it's not on the same level as the Adrian Melon thing, but it is another example where you look at it and go like, this is operating on a completely different level from the rest of the fucking movie.
Yeah. And again, totally.
It really is.
And again, it kind of stands in isolation. It doesn't really, nothing really happens as a result of that.
No.
The little girl's death doesn't really mean anything in the wider film.
No, it's not a signifier. It's a
great sequence. Sequence. The lighting,
sequence.
The pacing is really good. One of the few genuine horror sequences in the film that doesn't have a gag at the end of it.
Christ, yeah. And I mean, and Skarsgård plays it. I mean, I think he's been brilliant.
Oh, I mean, Skarsgård is one of the best things in the entire thing. He's reinvented Pennywise. He's made a horror monster. I mean, regardless of what we're talking about here, there are going to be people who are going to remember Pennywise for years to come as a classic movie monster. In the same way that a lot of us did when we watched the 1990s Tim Curry one,
It's something. I mean, that's something Kermode commented on. Actually, he said that he calls it the strangely beloved miniseries, and he was explicit in his review that he said he thinks one of the reasons, or perhaps even the main reason that film is so beloved, is because of Curry's.
Oh, that's totally true.
Because
there's not much else that's good in it.
No, let's be honest.
I mean, brutal honesty. I remember the first time I came back to watch it. After it was years after I'd watched it as like a teenager, maybe the last time. And I remember, and I was really excited, and I was like, "Oh God, this scared me as a kid." Sat down and watched it, and I was like, "Oh."
And I'll tell you what, as well, I think one of the reasons it's quite instructive is because I think it's a good example of like where. Trying to go for the faithful adaptation is not always the best idea.
Especially with King. Yeah. I would say, especially with King, because his books are generally, certainly his classic ones, are huge. There's so much you've got to explore,
They're also inherently novelistic, not cinematic.
Exactly.
I'm sorry,
yeah.
but they are.
No,
I
it's
mean,
true.
That's a compliment, not an insult.
No, it's true. there's a literary element to his books,
Yeah.
in the same way there is
Absolutely.
to, for example, Terry Pratchett. There's a reason why every single version, every
just
single
can't get it done,
attempt
can they?
to visualize Pratchett never works. It's because they're literary by their nature. The jokes are literary, in the same way that in King, very often the scares are literary as well.
Yeah.
The best adaptations of King are the ones like Kubrick's Shining.
Yeah.
It's the ones where they take the base elements, the ideas, the imagery, and then they rejig it to make it work as a film.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's right.
And I think, I mean, The Mist is.
Is the other one that immediately comes to my mind.
Oh god, that film is
Just
so good.
Yeah, I know.
Hurts to
I'm
watch.
going to be writing about that in a couple of weeks, and it's.
I don't watch it
really
often
looking
because
forward
it hurts.
to Oh God, it's.
It's unbelievable.
It's actually aggressive towards its audience. I mean, it's
Yeah, oh yeah, no, the Mist wants to hurt
Yeah,
you. The
it's-
Mist wants to make you feel bad.
that's
and
that's
it's-
great,
it's-
isn't it? That's a wonderful
Yeah,
thing.
no, absolutely.
It's a wonderful
fan.
thing for a horror film to do. I mean, this relates
Yeah.
back to the Adrian Melon sequence, and I want to emphasize to the nth degree because I can already hear the counter.
no,
You know,
I know,
I can
yeah.
already hear the counter arguments. I can already hear the people sharpening their pitchforks. It's not about censorship. It's not about the violence. It's not about the content or the subject matter. It really isn't.
No.
It's about tonal inconsistency and what that does to
That's right.
relevance.
That's right. It's not about the sequence. It's about that sequence in that movie. in that place.
Exactly.
That's the problem.
If I'd seen it in
And if
something
the rest
else,
of the movie had carried that tone, this would be a completely.
oh
different
my
conversation
god! If
right
they'd
now.
done it, if they'd been brave enough,
Yeah.
if they had the freedom to do it, and if that tone had carried through the rest of the film or it even deepened, whoa! And you know what? It's possible to do it.
Of course it is, because it is there in the source
It's all
material. I mean,
there.
that's what I was thinking as you were talking there. Like, because that's the thing is, the book does have that.
Of course
tone.
it does. I mean, look at what it descends
is-
into. You've got the domestic
exactly.
abuse. You've got the Stan's suicide. That was another sequence, actually.
Yeah.
Stan's suicide, I thought, was really well handled in this, but it was too isolated. It was
Yeah.
way too isolated.
Again, it was fucking rushed.
Yeah,
man.
and rushed. Yeah,
Just-
too quick. Too quick. I wanted
It's
to
like,
see
come on.
more of him. I wanted
Yeah.
to see more of who he was, because of course he doesn't otherwise have a real place in this film.
Now, what did you think about the change at the end, though, with Stan? Talking of Stan, because this is another interesting, and this is, I think this is actually quite a major shift that they made. This
Oh,
is
with where you had the sequence with his bar mitzvah.
No, the thing about him sending out the letters.
Oh, the letters. I didn't like it.
No, me
I didn't
neither.
like it.
No.
I didn't like. It's like, well, no.
It made it cuddly. It made it.
Yeah.
It made Stan's. It completely changed, because the whole point of it, for me anyway, the whole point of Stan's suicide in the book.
Firstly, it's worth remembering, in the book, Stan kills himself before we know who he is.
Yeah.
We don't know anything about this guy. The first thing we get to meet is we meet his wife,
Yeah.
actually, and we get his life, the story of him and his wife in 30 pages, and then she goes upstairs and he's killed himself. At that point in the narrative, we have no idea who this guy is. And the chapter's called 6 phone calls.
Yeah.
And the first phone call is him, and he dies. And the first time you read it, I was like, okay, so what? 5 more people are going to get phone calls and kill themselves.
Yeah.
This is a strange fucking book. It's very discombobulating. But for me, the point of Stan's suicide in the narrative is to underline just how absolutely fucking terrifying what they're being asked to come back to is.
Yeah.
You know, it makes it very clear that this is like, you know, there is at least one person upon getting that phone call that would rather do that
Yeah.
than carry on just being in the world, remembering anything about that. You know, like it's a massive, and it is there's a nihilism to it. It's dark, it's bleak, and they completely removed that.
Yeah, and
That's
also
just gone in this version.
they apologise for it. That's the worst
Yeah.
thing, and that's something this film does a hell of a lot. It
it does.
apologises for its trauma. It apologises for its horror. It apologises for its violence. That's why, I mean, part of me, a cynical part of me, thinks that's why the Ritchie closet gay subtext exists.
Absolutely.
You know,
There's, you know,
it's to
You can't
apologise
discount
for the
you can't discount the cynicism of that, can you?
it's to apologise for the Adrian
Potentially.
Melon moment.
Yeah.
And I hate that. That is actually
that
something I really hate. If you're going to go for this stuff, if you're going to make a horror film, don't apologise for including
That's right.
horrific stuff.
Or, you know what? If you want to make Final Destination, make Final Destination, right? That's fine. If you want to make popcorn horror, make fucking popcorn horror. It's a great genre. I love popcorn horror. Adore it. I can have a great time with the popcorn.
But don't pretend you can do that and the serious stuff in the same film, because you can't.
It's category error. And the other thing I did want to talk about, though, because this is interesting. So we talk quite a lot about the tonal problem, and one of the things I do find interesting is we've talked a lot about the bleakness of the book and the darkness of the book. That is, the book does have comedy as well.
Yeah, it does.
The book is funny. The kids are funny in particular. Ritchie is funny, sometimes not intentionally in the books, often not intentionally. Actually, that's one of the things I love about Ritchie, and one of the things I loved about the movie version of Ritchie. He's funny about one joke in 3.
Yeah.
You know, and that's actually about right. Like he just can't control himself. He's a blabber. He just shoots off, and then every now and then he gets off a good one. But actually, quite a lot of the time, he's kind of not that funny.
Yeah.
And I think that's quite. And like, I mean, my favourite payoff gag in part 2 was when Eddie when he says he actually admits that he doesn't like his own material, and Eddie's like, I fucking knew it. I fucking knew it.
You know, I mean,
that's a legit great moment.
Absolutely.
I mean, that was really fun.
And I really liked Eddie too as an adult, you know?
Yes.
I really
actually, you know what?
liked
We haven't really talked about that performance. And yeah, wonderful. And how much did he look like the
I
kid?
know, right? Actually, I think generally they really nailed that. Most of them actually looked like the children quite a lot. But I
agree. The casting was really
Eddie
good.
was one that I got a lot of laughs out of as an adult. A lot of laughs, like genuine laughs. And I thought they fit as well. I actually thought that they fit in the tone of the film.
Yep, I'd agree with that. I mean,
I have a kind of meta concern about playing Eddie too much for laughs, actually, because I think there is something about Eddie's character that is there's something both deeply tragic and ultimately incredibly heroic about Eddie in the book, and I think that unfortunately both of those got blunted a bit by playing him for laughs as much as they did.
Yeah,
but it worked. I mean, it worked as a bit of cinema, and it was a great performance. I mean, that, as I say, that's more of a meta concern than that's complaining about what the film wasn't rather than what it was, I guess, really.
But legitimate nevertheless. I mean, what I like about Eddie, certainly in the book, is he barring Stan, who's obviously the most scared. He is probably the most scared of the losers.
Yeah, absolutely.
Not just of it, but of everything.
Right. And the thing about Eddie is it's his blind love and loyalty for his friends that keep him moving forward long after his, every single instinct of him is screaming to get the fuck out.
Well, he's the most in love with all of them, isn't he? Of all of them, he's the most in love with the group and with everyone else.
Because of his background.
Yeah.
Because of.
Well, he's never really been loved, has he? His mother doesn't love him. She treats him as something other. There's a very dark and disturbing.
It's practically Munchausen. I mean, it's Munchausen
by proxy before they had it, right?
Yeah.
I mean, basically.
Absolutely, yeah. It's a disturbing relationship, isn't it?
Oh, goodness me. Yeah. But that's the thing, isn't it? He thinks he's loved by his mother. So what it means is he doesn't actually really know what love is. It's certainly healthy. A healthy kind of love until he meets the gang.
Until he meets the guys,
Yeah, it's very different.
I mean, I would have loved to have seen them take the Ritchie Eddie thing a bit further. I really would.
No,
I mean, have it have all the tensions that it's supposed to have. And if they wanted to keep Eddie straight, fine. Absolutely
I
fine.
think that would have been the thing to do. I mean, I'm even saying, like, let it get ugly.
Yeah.
Really deal with that. Deal with that thing about unrequited love where it's just like, it ain't, this is not Ben and Beverly. This is like...
No, this is not going to happen.
Have the homophobia bubbling under the surface for Eddie, as well as, just have it all, why not?
Why
let
not?
It all hang
Go
out,
for it. Yeah, absolutely. And let it play on Eddie's own fears. Let him remember all of the stereotypes of the 1980s. Gay men have AIDS and
right. I mean, my God, it plays into his pathology perfectly, doesn't
it? And why, as a story, I don't get why people who are being paid X amount as Hollywood storytellers don't get this.
Again, they didn't know they were writing a part.
No, of course they didn't.
They didn't know. No. They didn't have it. If they had and they had the ideas, then maybe they could have threaded it back in.
Yeah,
but
it's true.
And part one's. Let's be honest. Part one's a better movie.
Oh, it's better on such a level that it's hard to put the two together. It's hard to view them equivalently. It's just so much more coherent. than this one.
Absolutely, and 2 feels like... I mean, actually, that's the other thing about 2, and, this ties in with some of what you said earlier about your, enjoying the cameos and stuff, but at the same time feeling a bit kind of queasy about them. Like, it does feel like Part 2 feels like a victory lap.
Yeah.
Almost.
Yeah.
And it's a bit unearned. It's like... You can't have your victory lap until you've actually landed it, and you haven't landed it. It's a bit... It's a little bit smug.
There is a smugness to it. There is a wry and knowing smugness to it that does have the effect of undermining it quite significantly.
Yeah, I think it does. And it's a real shame. Because again, and it's like... Because there's the other reference, isn't it? There's actually... They do a Here's Johnny gag, right? They have a Shining gag in there at one point. And actually, my favourite reference, which wasn't to Stephen King at all, but I have to shout it out, the reference to The Thing.
Yeah, that was great. Loved that.
Fucking brilliant.
Loved that. Yeah.
I actually said it out loud with Ritchie as he said it.
Of course.
I broke my cardinal rule of talking in the cinema because I knew what was happening. And I was just, this is impossibly perfect.
It was great, and I love the sequence too. I thought the Stan spider head was actually quite disturbing, and I liked it a lot.
That was fucking great. No, that was great, and that felt. You see, that was nice because that felt in keeping with the spirit of the horrors of the book, but they created something new, and that's what you want it to be, right? That's how you want the experiment to work, and it's frustrating they didn't pull that off more often.
Yeah.
They were far more successful, I think, in part 1 with that kind of thing than they were in this. But that was a legit great one, and it looked fucking horrible.
It really worked.
When the spider leg came out of his tear duct, I was actually fucking proper wincing. I was like,
not nice.
Yeah, I was like, okay, well done, guys.
Yeah.
You got me.
Yeah, that was a good one. That was a good one. And a great callback, great callback.
Yeah, no, super.
But...
But that's the thing, isn't it? Like, 1 or 2 of them, maybe, but it became almost a rhythm itself.
Yeah.
It became almost a part of the... And
you can almost feel them coming in every sequence.
That's right.
There's only 1 or 2 where it doesn't, where it feels as... It actually earns its own weight, Right. And it's not often, unfortunately. It's not often enough.
No, that's right.
It's a strange one. I mean, I know a lot has hit the cutting room floor, and I'm hoping when we get the next cut of the film, there is more that actually does away with a lot of these problems we have. I mean, maybe there is more stuff involving the Adrian Melon murder. Maybe they did shoot the sequences where the killers are arrested and whatnot. Maybe there is something about, maybe Mike mentions that the child murder started a short time after. Maybe they tie it back in mythologically. Maybe there's more. Maybe there's more with the losers as adults. Maybe we get to see a bit more of Bev and her world, Let's hope so, eh?
Yeah, I mean, I know we're getting towards wrapping up now, but you did what you just said there, reminded me, I have to touch on this, like, as much as I love Ritchie and I love what they did with Ritchie in this story, what the fuck happened to Mike?
Oh, gee, what was going on?
What the actual fuck?
In part
Where
one,
was Mike?
In part 1, he's more or less cut out. He doesn't even need to be in it.
No.
He really doesn't. The character doesn't need to be in it because they took away his principal role and gave it to Ben.
That's right.
The oddest decision, the strangest decision. And
then in part 2, they glue it back onto him again, and they have him literally living above the library.
I don't get it.
Like, what?
I actually don't get it. And then you have him being exposition man.
Yeah, and then you have him lie to the entire gang.
Yeah.
Like, fuck off.
Yeah.
What are you doing to this character?
It's not necessary. Why do you hate him?
Yeah, exactly. Why do you hate Mike? What have you got against Mike, you guys?
Yeah, what is it about Mike that they don't like? That's the odd thing. I mean, I suppose you could also make the argument for Henry Bowers as well, because he gets short shrift in this movie as well.
He does, yeah. He absolutely does. I mean, that was a real interesting example with Henry, where it was like, okay, mechanically, I know you're hitting all the points that you're going to hit with Henry. And actually, there's an argument that Henry's story in part 2 has the most fidelity to the novel of any of them. He pretty much does exactly what he does in the book.
He does.
He does. He goes through, he meets the same people, he hits the same spot, but like, gee.
But his significance is taken away completely because he doesn't put Mike in the hospital.
Well, there you go.
You know.
Yeah, and the fact that they cut out the entire subplot of Bev's husband and Bill's wife, and I understand why.
Totally understand why. But again, I mean, you look at like Audra, who's so significant in the book. You know, she's so significant because she's the way back. She's the way back for Bill into the adult world. You know, into his life. Apologies, ladies and gents, for the slightly truncated ending to this conversation. Fortunately, I do think before Kit was spirited away or taken by whatever rose from the sewers to drag him away, we did manage to cover pretty much every base we wanted to. Kit, if you are out there, it might be worth getting in touch just so I can be sure that you're still alive. I'm not quite sure what happened at the end there. There were some very, very, very strange sounds that came over the call, my end, certainly. I'm fairly certain I heard what could have been laughter. I'm fairly certain I heard children laughing in the background. That was distressing. What could have potentially been circus music? Not nice. Not nice at all. Anywho, for those who want to follow Kit elsewhere other than this series, you will find links to his podcast and his various works down below, including The Finite, which is a very, very, very fine novella indeed. As for myself, you know where to find me. You can find me around here on the Exaggerated Elegy channel, over at Twitter on Enigmatic Elegy, and you can also find my works of fiction knocking about Hammy Hamazon, including Born in Blood Volume 1, my latest short story collection, so please go check that out. And until next time, ladies and gentlemen, bye-bye!